There's a particular kind of shame that only comes from knowing you weren't ready and going anyway. It's different from the shame of rejection. Rejection is clean. They didn't want you. It's their loss. Move on. That's what we tell ourselves. But the shame of your own unreadiness, of showing up to something and realizing in real time that you don't have what it takes, that the only person who let you down was you, that's a different animal. That shame lives in your body. It becomes a reference point. I'm 39 years old now, and I can still feel the exact temperature of that particular failure, like it happened last week instead of 22 years ago. I'm going to tell you about it, and I'm going to tell you why it might be the single most important thing that ever happened to my career and my life, even though at the time it felt like proof that I'd been delusional about my own abilities. It took me years to understand that the embarrassment wasn't the problem. It was the cure. I was 19 years old and studying at Cornell. I was in this experimental theater program, the kind where everyone's drinking coffee and talking about Artaud and pretending they understand what the hell Artaud actually meant. I was good in that world. I was talented in a way that theater people recognized. I was getting cast in things. I was the guy professors pulled aside and said, you should really do this professionally. You've got something. I was hungry. I was certain. I was the kind of arrogant that comes from never having been seriously tested. There was this showcase. You have to understand, in theater at that level, a showcase is kind of everything. It's where you're exposed to industry people, agents, directors who might actually care about your work. They bring in people from New York, people whose job it is to spot talent, and I got cast in a scene. It wasn't the lead, but it was substantial. It was a moment where I could actually show people what I could do, where I could demonstrate that I wasn't just good in the college theater bubble, that I had something that could translate to the actual world. I was cocky about it. I told people about it. I'd find ways to mention it in conversation. Yeah, at the showcase, I was already imagining the agent meetings that would follow, the callbacks, the sense of validation that would finally prove that I wasn't wasting my time or my parents' money. I was living in that future in a way that meant I wasn't really present in the actual work. I was coasting. I was showing up to rehearsals thinking I already knew what I was doing. I was that guy in the room, the one that directors secretly resent because he's not actually listening. He's just waiting for his turn to show how good he is. The night of the showcase was cold and clear and full of possibility. I remember the feeling of walking into the theater, this small black box, and seeing these sharp-looking people in the audience with headshots and glasses and the particular posture of people who've seen 1,000 theater students perform. I remember thinking, okay, here's where everything changes. Not here's where I do my best work. Not here's where I'll hopefully make people feel something. Just here's where I become real. The scene was a monologue about 2 minutes long. It was from this contemporary piece about a man confronting something shameful. I'd rehearsed it probably 100 times. I knew every word. I knew every inflection. I knew exactly what I was going to do and how the audience was going to respond. I walked onto that stage and my mind went completely blank, not a little bit blank. Not the kind of blank where you stumble and recover. Completely, utterly blank. Like someone had reached into my head and deleted the file. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I stood there in the silence and I could feel the audience waiting. I could feel the energy in the room shift from anticipation to discomfort. And then I felt something worse. I felt myself panic, not quietly. My face went red. My hands started to shake. I was standing in front of all these important people and I was essentially having a nervous breakdown in real time. Someone off stage was feeding me the line, the director, I think, or the stage manager. She said it very quietly. I repeated it like a robot. No emotion, no presence, no actual understanding of what I was saying. And then I just trudged through the rest of it, mechanical, dead. A shell of a person saying words. It was maybe the worst 90 seconds of my life to that point. It felt like it lasted 4 hours. When I got off stage, I went straight to the bathroom and threw up. Not metaphorically. Actually threw up. I sat in a stall in the theater bathroom and just shook for a while. I could hear the other showcases happening, could hear people applauding scenes. That actually worked. And I was in this bathroom stall thinking about suicide. Not seriously, exactly, but in that abstract way you think about it when you are 19 and you've just realized you're not who you thought you were. The worst part, and this is the part that actually taught me something, the worst part was that I had excuses ready. I had them lined up like ammunition. I hadn't slept well. I was distracted. I was nervous. The pressure was too much. It wasn't a real representation of my talent. If I'd had more rehearsal time, if the director had understood my process better, if I want, it's so emotionally sensitive. If the audience hadn't been so intimidating, if I had a whole narrative ready to defend myself against the one thing that actually happened, I wasn't ready and I went anyway and it showed. I didn't go to the agent meetings afterward. I told myself I was sick. I told myself it would be humiliating to show my face. I told myself that they'd all seen my embarrassment and nothing I said afterward would change their minds. I disappeared for about a week. Skipped classes. I didn't answer calls from my theater professor. I just sat in my dorm room with my own thoughts, which were uniformly terrible. Then this professor, his name was Vic Polkinghorn, he found me. He literally just showed up at my dorm room and told me to walk with him. We walked around campus and he didn't let me make excuses. He said something I've never forgotten. He said, the people who become actors are not the ones who are naturally the most talented. They're the ones who are willing to feel like shit and keep going. You just feel like shit. The real test is what you do next. He told me that I'd wasted a showcase because I'd gone in arrogant and unprepared. He said that wasn't a tragedy. It was a data point. And the data was saying that I needed to actually commit to the work, not just assume I had it in me. That talent is a starting place, not a destination. That the people who make it are the ones willing to be humiliated and use it as information instead of proof of their worthlessness. He said, you're going to have a million moments like this if you keep going. They're going to feel like the end of the world. They're not. They're just moments where you get to choose whether you're serious or not. I didn't believe him. I thought he was being nice. I thought everyone was just being nice because I was devastated. But something about what he'd said stuck. Maybe it was just the fact that someone had acknowledged how bad it was without trying to make it better. Maybe it was the permission he gave me to let it be bad. I went back to rehearsals. I didn't apologize. I just showed up and worked differently. I stopped performing like I knew what I was doing. I started actually exploring. I started asking questions. I started treating the work like it was something I could fail at, which meant it was actually something I could succeed at. Does that make sense? As long as you're going through the motions, as long as you're assuming you already know how to do something, you're safe. Nobody can criticize you for not trying. But the moment you actually commit to learning something, the moment you put yourself in the position of not knowing, you become vulnerable to failure. That showcase failure became the thing that changed how I approached acting. It became the thing that made me take craft seriously instead of just assuming I had natural talent, and that would be enough. It made me understand that discipline isn't punishment for not being naturally good enough. Discipline is the price of actually becoming good. I started studying differently after that. I took voice lessons. I did movement training. I learned how to breathe through panic. I studied Meisner and Stanislavski and all these different techniques that I'd previously dismissed as too technical. I understand now that I dismissed them because they required admitting that there was something I didn't already know. That failure that night gave me permission to not know. There's this thing in literature, this concept of the dark night of the soul. It's in John of the Cross, this 16th century Saint poet. He wrote about this moment where you're so far from God, so separated from everything that normally sustains you, that you have to make a choice. You can either give up or you can keep going without any guarantee that it's going to work out. Most people, when they describe it, they talk about it like it's this catastrophic, tragic thing. But John understood something important. Sometimes you need to be stripped of all your illusions about yourself in order to actually become who you're meant to be. That's what my showcase failure did. It stripped away the illusion that I could just show up and be good. It forced me to actually do the work. And here's the thing that seems paradoxical until you really understand it. The more I stopped believing in my own natural talent and the more I committed to actually learning, the better I became. Not because I suddenly got more talented, because I became honest about what I didn't know, and honest people can actually learn. I left Cornell after that year. I moved to New York. I did tiny theater productions in basements and black box theaters where maybe 30 people showed up. I wasn't famous. I wasn't even particularly noticed, but I was working with intention. I was showing up like someone who knew they didn't know what they were doing, which meant every rehearsal was a chance to learn something. Every scene partner had something to teach me. Every failure meant something instead of just being a threat to my ego. The thing about humiliation is that it's only actually useful if you let it be instructive. If you treat it as proof of your worthlessness, you're just a victim. But if you treat it as information, as feedback about what you need to work on, it becomes the most valuable education you can get, because it's the kind that sticks. You don't forget failure. You don't forget the feeling of standing in front of people and not being ready. Years later, when I was auditioning for Game of Thrones, when I was reading the script for Tyrion and understanding that this was a role I could actually do something with, I wasn't arrogant about it. I was terrified, yes, but also grounded. I understood that I'd gotten this far not because I was naturally better than other people. I'd gotten this far because I'd been willing to be wrong, to be humiliated, to be a beginner at 35 years old, if that's what it took. I went into that audition room not as someone who had the answers, but as someone who'd learned how to ask good questions and how to work. I think about that showcase failure every time I walk into an audition now. Every time I'm about to do something that matters, I think about that 90 seconds where I forgot my lines and panicked and felt like the world was ending. And you know what? It's comforting. It's a reminder that I've already survived worse. That the worst thing that can happen in a room is that you'll be embarrassed, and embarrassment doesn't kill you. Embarrassment teaches you if you're willing to listen to it. I see this all the time in younger actors, this assumption that talent should equal success, this shock when they don't get the part they wanted. And I want to tell them that not getting the part is not the tragedy. The tragedy is thinking that your talent is supposed to bypass the actual work of learning your craft. The tragedy is thinking that being naturally gifted should spare you from the humiliation of not being ready, because here's the truth. Humiliation is the only teacher that actually sticks. You can read about discipline in a book. You can't understand it until someone looks through you in a moment where you're completely unprepared and you realize that you're not as good as you thought you were. So if you're in that place right now where you've just failed at something that mattered, where you're convinced you're not cut out for whatever you're trying to do, where you're thinking about giving up and finding something safer, don't. That failure is not proof of your worthlessness. It's proof that you actually tried something difficult. It's proof that you're serious enough about it to risk humiliation. Most people never get there. Most people are too smart to try anything where they might fail in front of people who matter. You just did that. You've already demonstrated the most important skill. You're willing to be wrong. Now, the only question is what you're going to do with that willingness. Are you going to make excuses and disappear? Or are you going to use it as information about what to work on next? I used it. That showcase failure became the reason I'm sitting here now, able to say that I actually did the work, that I didn't just coast on talent and charm, that I learned something real about what it means to commit to something. And that not the success, not the awards, not the recognition, that willingness to be humiliated and learn from it, that's what I'm actually proud of. That's what I think about when people ask me how I made it, not how I got lucky, how I got willing. Let yourself be humiliated. Let yourself be wrong. Let yourself not be ready and find out what you do with that knowledge, because that's where actual change starts. Not in the moments where you're triumphant. In the moments where you're forced to admit that you need to become better and you choose to do it anyway.